This old credenza, buffet, or sideboard looks fine from a distance, but a closer look will reveal 60 years of damage and a failing finish. It's a beautiful example of an original 1960s mid-century modern piece made by the United Furniture Company in Lexington, North Carolina. I spent several days restoring it, and once completed, it's not easy to admit, but the client didn't like the result, and neither did I. That's where this restoration story will eventually lead me, learning one of my hardest lessons, trusting my instincts, and being willing to start over completely. My name is Barry, and it's good to be with you again. Removing the drawer pulls would make stripping the old finishes easier, but they appear to be glued on, and even with heat applied, they didn't budge. And that's fine, I'll leave them in place so as not to cause damage to the underlying veneer. During this restoration, you'll see many hands at work, and you might be wondering, who is the client? She's actually a friend, and she helped me with the first part of this project. Over the last several months, I've had the chance to work on some of these old furniture pieces alongside friends and family here in my workshop. Sharing this process of learning, problem solving, and creating together makes every challenge more meaningful. Whenever I find obvious damage, I try to make the repairs immediately before the loose pieces are lost forever. I'll use superglue and some accelerator to repair this leg. The base of this credenza must have been considered unstable at some point, so much that someone decided to drive these long screws through the legs. Once those are removed, I can remove the factory screws that help hold the base to the body of this piece. The base was also glued on from the factory, but not difficult to separate. Once disassembled, I can begin to strip away the original, worn lacquer finish. I'll apply a clean strip premium stripper to every section and allow it to set up for about 15 minutes before scraping away the old finishes. With every piece, this process involves trying a variety of metal and plastic scrapers until I find the one that works best. If done right, removing all the old layers is often the most satisfying part of the restoration process. What I didn't know at the time was that this restoration would be a failure, and I'd eventually have to repeat these steps. Scrubbing with No. 2 steel wool helps remove the excess finish remover before cleaning the surface with Clean Strip's afterwash product. It's not uncommon to find dents on the surface where the old finishes remain. Scraping carefully with a carbide scraper should remove most of this. A fine brass brush can help remove the excess from the areas that are hard to reach with a scraper. Once most of the finishes have been removed, I can move on to repairing the base. This will involve tightening all the original screws. It was at this point that I decided, since these holes were already here from the additional screws, why not countersink the holes and keep the screws that help reinforce the base? This would be a good time to share with you most of the tools I used during the refinishing process. I'll start with the Surf Prep 3x4 sander and attach a sponge-like sanding pad to help conform to the profile of the legs. I'll mix a 2-part epoxy filler to fill the holes where the screws were added. This dries quickly, so wax wash remover will help keep this filler malleable. It's common for mid-century furniture to be constructed using a thick substrate like cheaper poplar, then covered with a thin layer of veneer. You can usually spot the thin veneer on the underside of the drawers. The veneer is usually a more desirable species like walnut, or in this case, a species I'm not familiar with, which is where my failure begins. I feel blessed to be able to restore and refinish vintage and antique furniture, and to tell the stories behind each unique piece. There's no way I would be able to do this without your support and the support from sponsors. Today's project is made possible by Lasfit. By viewing the sponsored segment and choosing Lasfit, you're supporting my vision for giving many of these old pieces a second chance. Lasfit makes quality, affordable floor mats and bed liners, as well as other aftermarket products for hundreds of vehicle makes and models. I move a lot of vintage furniture, and without a proper bed liner, the bed of my truck would get destroyed. I recently upgraded to Lasfit's all-weather floor mats and bed liner to better protect my vehicles. Lasfit's mats are precision fit, laser measured for your exact vehicle. They're made from a tough, flexible TPE material that's not only waterproof, but easy to remove and clean, which comes in handy here in Wisconsin with all the rain, mud, snow, and salt. When moving heavy furniture pieces, I need a surface that grips when it needs to, and cushions when it matters most. Anti-skid surface keeps these finds from sliding around, while the soft touch material helps prevent scratches and dents on fragile wood legs or original finishes. A quick rinse and it looks brand new. There's no cracking, no warping, no weird smells, just durability that I expect from a product like this. Many of you have purchased Lasfit floor mats and bed liners through my channel, and I wouldn't stand behind a product that I wasn't completely satisfied with myself. So check out the link in the video description or visit lasfit.com to see if Lasfit offers floor mats or bed liners for your vehicle. You can use code MCM20 for 20% off your order. Thank you Lasfit for continuing to support my vision. Most of the time, I'll sand the veneer using 150 grit and 180 grit sandpaper. By stopping at 180 grit, the pores in the wood fibers are kept open, absorbing the stain deep enough to give the wood a nice rich color. I already knew at this point that this veneer was too light to be walnut, so as the story unfolds, let's see if you can identify the wood species used for this piece. When working on furniture with thin veneer, I usually only use the power sanders during the first pass with 150 grit. For the remainder of the sanding, I use a variety of hand sanding blocks and sanding pads from 180 grit to 220 grit. I continued sanding, unaware that the day would end in disappointment. At this point in the day, I was simply enjoying my favorite time of year, when the leaves begin to fall and the morning air carries that first refreshing chill. With the garage doors open while I work, it's also that wonderful time of year when neighbors stop by, bringing over their last fresh picks from the garden. Although my work is often interrupted, my schedule allows it, and building relationships with family, friends, and neighbors is something I cherish. I don't do this for every piece of furniture, but occasionally, while sanding, I'll gently scuff the insides of the drawers with a fine sanding sponge. I'll later spray these with the lacquer sealer, and this should give the insides of the drawers a fresh, clean look. Now that this piece has been sanded, I can begin to form an opinion as to what wood species were used here. The overall color in its raw, sanded state is a pale golden beige with a pinkish undertone, which is characteristic of unfinished elm. The top of the buffet has broad, wavy, cathedral grain patterns, which is typical of American elm. During my research, I also discovered that United did use a lot of elm veneer paired with solid birch trim and bases to build a lot of their furniture during the middle of the 20th century. So elm is my best guess, but I could be wrong. I felt this piece was too pale to simply clear coat. There were too many contrasting tones that made it look unfinished, so I decided to apply a light walnut oil-based stain, then wipe it off immediately. It should have given the wood a warm, rich tone and tied everything together, but this is where things started to go wrong. Parts of it looked great, exactly as I had hoped, but other sections absorbed the stain unevenly, and left a noticeably blotchy look throughout. Looking back, it may have helped to apply a pre-stain conditioner first, or close down the pores in the wood fibers even more by sanding all the way to 220 grit. Against my better judgment, I decided to move forward, thinking I could mask some of the blotching by adding more color while spraying with lacquer sealer. As I continued staining, I was actually pleased with how most of this was turning out, so I was feeling optimistic as the day ended. The stain dried overnight, and first thing in the morning, I wheeled everything outside to spray on the lacquer sealer. Many of you have asked about this, so here's a quick 15-second review. Basecamp sent me their new M Pro Dusk Mask. It's an affordable, reusable mask that's very comfortable, and it comes with additional filters and nose bridge padding. I'll link their info in the video description so you can do your own research to see if this is a good fit for the kind of work you're doing. And be sure to use my discount code to save some money. Now that the stain is dry, I'll spray on a few light coats of lacquer sealer using a cheap HVLP sprayer with a 1.8mm tip. This is a solvent-based nitrocellulose lacquer, and the solute will settle to the bottom, so it's important to give this a good stir before using. I'll also mix in some lacquer thinner to help slow down the dry time. This will help prevent moisture from being trapped, which would give the finish a cloudy appearance. Here's an example of that happening on another recent project. The first light coat of clear lacquer sealer went on as expected with no blushing, so at this point I was still hopeful. For the second coat of sealer, I added a medium walnut dye stain, hoping to mask some of the blotching and also give this piece a more uniform color, as I usually do, but it only made things worse in this case. While the first coat of sealer dried, I decided to address the missing door pull. We agreed that making a new one wasn't necessary for this credenza. I was able to find an original pull from a Lane Acclaim piece, and I thought the profile would blend well with the original design of the other pulls. A quick coat of gold lacquer and a glossy clear coat should give this a fresh look, while still remaining subtle and somewhat minimalistic. This credenza is a nice example of a mid-century modern design, but keep in mind, we agreed that it's not a high-end piece and was mass-produced, so a full restoration wasn't necessary. The goal is simply to have a clean, newly refinished, functional, vintage piece of furniture to be used daily. Several coats of sealer will build up a rough texture, so I'll gently sand this back with a 320 grit sanding pad, then clean the surface with wax wash remover and a cotton rag. So why do I keep saying this was a failure? Well, for the last step, I sprayed on a clear coat of flat Finisher's Choice lacquer, ready to call this project finally done. You know, they say when it rains it pours, and this is perhaps a poor example of that, but I hope to continue leaning into my own experiences, hoping others can in some way relate and possibly be encouraged. Here it was, 95% completed, and as I stood back, I realized by my own standards that this looked horrible, and in the words of the client, oh wow, too red. At that moment, I stood back and realized that I had failed. It was my own fault, and I would need to spend 2 days starting over completely. I came inside to find that one of the dogs ate the top off my lasagna. The silver lining in all this is, for once, following these last shots, I was able to put the camera down for 2 days and really enjoy my work, the gorgeous fall weather, and of course, Louis and Koda. It was a good chance to reflect on where my humble journey started, and with your faithful support, where it's going. So here it is, completely sanded again, all the way to 220 grit this time. I stained the entire piece the same color, but didn't add any dye stain to the coats of lacquer sealer, and I think both of these changes made all the difference. Now, I know this is just a piece of furniture, so the failure was not in any way life-changing, but this is my work, and failing is humbling to say the least. The second time around was certainly better, but still not perfect, and all I can say is, if you find yourself starting over after a miserable failure, just don't give up. My name is Barry, and thanks for joining me. Goodbye for now.